So Larry, tell me when I'm ready to go. Looks like I am ready to go, right? It says we're live on YouTube. Okay, so today is Tuesday, October 20th, 2020, and I'm calling to order the Common Council Ordinance Committee. This is the regular committee for meeting for this month, and I'm going to call the roll. David Hovelman.
Present.
Dominique Johnson.
Present.
Tom Keegan.
Here.
Manny Langella.
Here.
Tom Livingston.
Here.
Kadeem Roberts.
Present.
And I'm Lisa Shanahan, the chairman, and I'm here. Noticed. We don't have a public hearing. Is there anybody who's online for a public discussion? Or public comment, I mean to say.
We only have one person from the public, Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand electronically and I will unmute you. Otherwise, we'll move on. Yes, he has raised his hand. Mr. Taylor, you are unmuted. You can unmute yourself.
There he goes. Good evening, Mr. Taylor. I think you are now able to speak.
Okay, I live next door, 16 Kitty Lane.
Mr. Taylor?
Public comment that you'd like to make this evening, sir?
No, not really. I mean, I don't know why I got the letter. I guess because I live next door to him. Am I on the right thing? Is this for Burnell Mora Akura? Kitty Lane, North? No?
No,
Okay, sorry.
no worries. Okay, so no public comment, I am here to say. The next matter on our agenda is acceptance of the minutes. Can I have a motion to accept the motion? Thank you, Tom. Tom Livingston has asked us to accept the minutes. Sadly, everybody, I went through the minutes and because it was the public hearing, I have a number of corrections just to make it as clear as possible. So I beg your forgiveness for going through this in great detail.
Lisa?
Yeah.
Just so you know, our receptionist was one of the, our receptionist slash paralegal was one of the people who retired as part of the early retirement program. So we're down staff. So I'm actually going to be making the changes to the draft minutes that you guys approve. So I just want to make them right now so I can get them out and get them posted as soon as possible. So if I ask you to stop, it's because I'm trying to make the changes on the fly. Please go ahead.
Again, beg everybody's forgiveness because this is just so tricky. So the first thing on page 2, I think that the very top of it, it says Mr. Livingston said his concerns were. I feel like that is supposed to drop down to the old business where we're talking about conflict of interest and the ethics statute. Tom, do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yep, so I think that those fell into the wrong spot. So that first sentence, Mr. Livingston said his concern was, I think should appear under paragraph 6, old business, and I think it should appear as the third paragraph there. Does that make sense, Tom? I'm trying to pick up Tom's comments. And I think the sentence during executive session, no motions, I think that gets stricken.
Okay.
Okay, so
Thank you.
then anybody chime in if they have something as I go along. Under old business, then it says discuss and vote on complaint of Hans Jean. And then there's the first paragraph, Ms. Shanahan. And then there's the second paragraph, Ms. Shanahan then proceeded to read an affidavit. What I'd like to say in the second line is saying that stating that she did not receive any reporting records.
Reporting records. Okay.
Okay, and then you skip the next paragraph, Ms. Vogel, and then the very last sentence, the very last paragraph, second line, towards the end, he said first century, and I have to change some wording here because it's just not right. He said first century is not covered by the statute. And then in the very last sentence of that paragraph, it says status, that word should be statute.
So CPS complied with the statute by offering health benefits.
Before that.
Oh,
So-
status. I see that. Okay. Yeah, it's further back. Okay. Even if the
Also-
statute is applied.
Forgive me, this is-
Yeah,
Anybody else? You got
up ahead, up on page, if we're on page 2, just under old business, it's, the spelling of my name is H-E-U. Mr. Huvelman moved to table this item until the next meeting. It's H-E-U.
I missed that.
Okay, so it's in the bold font, David?
Yeah, it's in the bold font.
All right.
And that actually happens a couple of other places. I can call them out.
David, after the meeting's over, I'll take a look and I'll go through and change to the correct spelling of your name.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
While we're on page 2.
And on the bottom of page 2, I noticed that probably not that important, but first century, first is not capitalized at the bottom in the last sentence.
Now, the company's called Century Protective Services. So what he was saying is
Oh, I see. He said first, comma, got it. All right.
very painful. I really, please forgive me, especially people who are.
No, we're good. Thank you. It's all good.
Okay, so the next paragraph, Brian, I'm just going to go through, I'm going to read it with you, and then we're just going to change the words as it comes, because this is the most painful paragraph. First of all, it says, Mr. Bonas said it. I think it needs to say the living wage ordinance instead of it.
Yep.
Does not apply. I think the word to needs to be.
Yep.
Entities that employ 25 or more employees. And instead of the word it, we should say CPS employees.
Yep.
And
No,
it
at least I think you mean it says CPS employs 3 with the city of Norwalk.
should say
Within.
employees. And I was going to say 3 persons just to make it easier.
3 persons within the city. Okay.
And then the next sentence is, he said by definition, Century Protective is barred. I want to say, he said by definition, Century Protective Services is barred from the application of the.
Of the ordinance. Okay.
The next sentence is, Mr. Bonnet said, wait, how did I say this? Said that the complainant, sorry, I lost my own words, said complainant must file a complaint within 90 days. And Mr. Hans was employed over 2 years ago.
So Mr. Bonas said a complainant must file a complaint within 90 days, and this occurred over 2 years ago?
Yeah, but I kind of feel like Mr. Hans was employed over 2 years ago. I think we need to say something like that.
All right, and so just say Mr. Jean was employed over 2 years ago?
And then the next sentence says, he said, even if this complaint is rendered, so the word complaint should be put in there. Even if this complaint is rendered timely, the period of recovery is 90 days from the date of the complaint. So that's all okay.
Right.
And the last thing I'm going to say in that sentence or that paragraph, it says, he said he was relying on. And then that's fine with that. Then we skip a paragraph and then we go to the paragraph that starts Mr. Bonest. And in the very last line, I would strike the word includes and say describes.
Done.
And then get the next paragraph, and then it says Ms. Shanahan had some questions. She asked how many, quote, total, not quote, insert total employees.
Yep.
And then the next paragraph, I think.
Lisa, sorry. She asked how many employees Century employs.
Yes, employed. Thank you.
Or employed, yeah.
Employed. Thank you, Tom.
Okay.
Then the next paragraph, I think should start Mr. Sirocco, just so it's clear who's he, S-O-R-A-C-C-O. And then in this, all the way at the very end, at the word it should be replaced with the handbook.
A chance to read it, you mean? So instead of, Mr. Sirocco said during the orientation process, new employees are given a handbook and they should have a chance to read the handbook and come back with questions and return an acknowledgement that says it was received and they understood by the employee, or do you want the other it after says?
It, just to be clear.
What?
I would change the word it for the handbook.
In both its or just one it? Because there's two its in the, in
The
that sentence.
last it in the second line.
Okay, just the second line, okay.
Want to make it really clear that it's the handbook. Then on page 4, at the very top, the last sentence of the first paragraph, Mr. Bonas confirmed that he was and that they were not questioning that authority.
On the top, on the bottom of page 4 or top of page 4?
For the first paragraph, the last word was, the last word I want to change from that to that authority.
I'm still trying to find it.
Top of page 4, Mr. Hoovelman asked if Mr. Byrne was a duly appointed representative and authorized to sign the agreement. That's fine. Mr. Bonas confirmed that he was and that they were not questioning that authority.
Okay, thank you. I didn't see that at first. And we'll have to change the spelling of David's name because it comes up a couple times here.
Always, yeah. In the first sentence of the next paragraph, Mr. Hoovelman asked if you, and what we want to say is not you, but change you to CPS.
Okay,
And then the next sentence says, Mr. Bonas said he is arguing the alternative that they are not, oh wait, that's not it. It's the next sentence. If we are, I would rather say if CPS is a covered entity.
yep.
And then I'm jumping down to number 4, the fourth paragraph. And we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth line down. It says any employee. And I want to say, instead of employee, supervisor.
Supervisor.
Okay, and then after the committee goes into executive session, I'm looking at the third paragraph down, and I think the best way to do this, and anybody else who wants to chime in on this, I might not have like the best way to do this. What we're basically doing is saying that we made the decision, that I'm making a motion to make the decision. So I say Ms. Shanahan made the following motion to make a decision in the evidentiary hearing. Would that be the proper wording? Anyway.
What was it again, Lisa? Ms. Shanahan made a motion.
Made the following motion, made a motion to make a decision in the evidentiary hearing. And then we had the verbiage from Darren about how the decision should be made in compliance of chapter 62. And then their sentence starts, this decision is made in compliance. Do you see that sentence? Second sentence of that paragraph.
Yep.
This decision is made in compliance with Chapter 62 of Norwalk City Code regarding the decision made with regard to and then what I'm asking you to add is the decision made with regard to the living wage complaint by Mr. Hans Jean.
All right, so you said this decision is made in compliance with Chapter 62 of Norwalk City Code regarding living wage on the decision of August 18, 2020. Do you want it before on the decision?
I think that we should say is regarding the decision made with regard to
Regarding the decision made, yep,
with regard to the
Yep.
living wage complaint by Hans Jean.
you kind of blacked out there for a second. Made with regard to the living wage ordinance.
No, well, it could be, or, no, actually it's complaint. The decision made with regard to the living wage complaint by Mr. Hans Jean dated August 18, 2020.
Okay, got it.
Next word, the next sentence starts respondent. It should say failed, not filed.
Yep.
We're almost done, and that's it. I think that's it.
Wait a minute. It says respondent failed to comply with the living wage and failed to comply with so it should be failed to comply with the reporting requirements.
Great.
We gotta get rid of the of. All right, go ahead.
That's it.
All right. Anyone else?
Sorry, it was brutal, really.
That's
brutal.
all right. Got to get it right. David, again, I'll make the changes to your name throughout.
Anybody else have anything after that horror show? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to accept the minutes as revised. Guess we should take a vote. All in favor of accepting the minutes as revised?
Aye.
It's a unanimous decision. So minutes are accepted. Thank you. In our old business, next is the discuss and the vote of the Code of Ethics, Section 32-4, conflicts of interest, interference with duties, prohibited interest, and exceptions. And in the interest of full disclosure, Tom and I have been noodling over this with the help of David, and I think we're still not exactly happy with the wording that we have so far. And Tom, maybe you want to say what your reservations are, and we can get a little bit of feedback from our committee. And then I think we should, again, once table it, but we can get there in a minute.
I will do that, except I see Manny's name for Nick's face, but that's a different subject.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Very-
Sorry, I'm late. I'm gonna edit my name now. It's Nick.
Let me pull this up, Lisa.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up my document. So basically, I had a couple concerns about this. One, I thought that we weren't using language consistently through the document on this section. For example, some sections we talked about persons or groups closely tied with an officer or an employee or business association. Other sections we don't. I'm not saying there's substantive changes, but I think we need to be consistent throughout. There are other cases where we just need to tie the language to the rest of the statute. For example, it talks about municipal employees or officer, and that's not a term we use. And there's a place that we can add it. There's one other section where somebody by virtue of their officer employment may receive some benefit, but we do have an exception for that for like de minimis things like awards and that. So basically, these are just minor cleanup modifications that I think we ought to put in just to make it work throughout. And I think it just makes sense to do it offline unless the committee wants to go through it line by line. But I don't think that's the best use of everybody's time.
I don't either, especially when we have the chief on to talk about, and we've got Sabrina to move forward. It's a little bit of a cleanup. And then I think that Tom, Dave, and I would be interested to hear if anybody has any thoughts, especially about Section A, which is the new section that we wrote, which is a definition section about conflict of interest. And another thing that Tom and I have been bouncing back and forth is whether we need to use A, B, C, and D as kind of guardrails for the definition, or whether we feel as though the prohibited actions and exceptions listed in B and C, capital section B and capital section C, are sufficient. I think for me, I like the section, the A, B, C, and D's as just guardrails to give you the idea of what direct and indirect financial conflicts of interest are and what personal conflicts of interest are. But some people may feel as though that's onerous. So I'd be interested to, talk about this, I think, at the next meeting, if we could, because at that point, I think we'll have a cleaner document.
Yeah, and I'll just throw one more thing, which is in that ABC section, there's a comment about something being non-financial, but of significant importance. And I'm just struggling a little bit with those words into how you determine if something is significant importance to somebody else. So
that Mr. Church is on, and he's a member of the Board of Ethics. Do you have anything you'd like to lob in right now with thoughts?
No, I was just wanting to see what you guys came up with and if they were simple questions. If there's something, we have our board meeting Thursday. If there's something you'd like us to look into or do, I'm happy to relay the message and have us spearhead it, but it sounds like it's cleaning up on your end and then doing this next month.
I think if you'd like to take a look at what we have come up with, we'd love to have any thoughts and comments that you might have.
Okay.
So that'd be great. I think Brian can share that with you.
Sounds
So the Board of Ethics, received the clean version, mostly because all the red line versions get overwhelming. So there's a red line version and a clean version on the Board of Ethics agenda. I emailed it out to them in advance, but now it's also on the website, so anybody can access it if they want to take a look at it. It is 32.4 is part of the agenda for the Board of Ethics for the meeting on Thursday. The assumption was that Ordinance Committee would either make changes and send it to public hearing, or they would make changes and want feedback, or just want feedback prior to the next meeting. So we put it on there. So it is ready to be discussed by the Board of Ethics this coming Thursday.
Great. So I think getting feedback would be great. So I would be happy to entertain a motion to table this for our next meeting.
Well, Lisa, if I could, just before we get to that, I don't know what the ethics board's timing is, but does it make sense for them to look at it before we've had a chance to go through it a little more?
I'm open to either thought. We could,
I'm willing to, I can work on it the next couple of days, but that may not get them to their agenda in time. I don't know.
My just quick interjection, just for the value of the Board of Ethics time, is if we're happy to review it, provide commentary, and yet if we go and do that and then you go and are changing something, subtle things anyway that may end up being significant, it might make sense to see the whole document first and then have us do that. Or if our feedback would be helpful for you, I know we've been going down this road for a while now, so I'm happy to be patient and give you the time you need to follow through so you don't feel rushed or forced. Or if you feel us reviewing it again and providing additional feedback. I know as a board, we've gone through this several times as it is, so I'm not sure any additional new insight that we could provide. We're looking for something that you guys are comfortable with so that we can sign off on it essentially at this point. And Dave has his hand raised.
Yeah, Lisa, just real quick, what I'm thinking, and based on what I'm hearing, is maybe it might be good for the Board of Ethics to take a look at this, because this is such a major rewrite from the red line version, that they may have some insight in reading this that we're missing, that we can then come back, you, Tom, and can look at and refine as we move forward and get this thing, to a public hearing within the next couple of months.
The Board of Ethics has had the changes that were made, the work that was done in between the meetings, but there's been no conversation about what their thoughts on it, or if they would have any minor changes, significant changes, what their comments would be. It can't hurt to have their comments. They're going to be on Thursday, so it's not like it's going to negatively affect our ability to put this on the next Ordinance Committee meeting. I mean, they might be able to provide you guys with something. They might have nothing new, but it might help you guys in making any other comments that revisions that you might have besides what you already have.
I think my view, it would be that I wouldn't wordsmith it. I wouldn't ask the Board of Ethics to wordsmith it at all, but just give us a general impression if we're going in the right direction with the definition of conflict of interest, because that's where we were really struggling. We didn't like the conflict of interest definition. So if that would be okay, Mr. Church, for you to take a look at it and, don't go knee deep into the words, but go more into is it the right direction?
Noted. Sounds good.
Okay, let's do that. So once again,
Thank you, Michael.
is somebody willing to make a motion?
Thank you all.
to table this?
I'll move to table this until the following meeting.
Okay, that would be great. And a show of hands for in support of the motion. Those opposed? Great. So we'll table that. Our next item is Chapter 38, Article 1, Sections 38.1 through 38.6. This is the first time that we've brought this to the full committee, and we are basically responding to a situation that happened a year ago when the mayor and, as I remember, the police chief and others were concerned about waterfowl hunting off of Calf Pasture Beach. And so there was a 1-year suspension of waterfowl hunting, and then Deep came back to us this summer and asked us if we wouldn't reinstate the hunting and make new rules as we saw fit for that type of work. So this is the work of a number of us. I've shared it with everybody on the committee. The chief is here tonight. Thank you very much, Chief, to help us answer any questions that we might have with regard to this new statute. And I know that there was a couple of outstanding questions, and Tom Keegan, you had a couple I know that you had for the chief, and David's going to also talk to us about maybe perhaps the shot size that's used in hunting. So Tom, do you want to ask some of the questions that you had for the chief with regard to firearms and police officers?
My questions were more related to prohibition of firearms in city property, not necessarily the hunting. What I did want to know is what is new in this? I did not see the difference. Usually we get a copy that shows what is new in the ordinance versus what existed? So could Brian or somebody,
I can actually share it if somebody lets me share the screen.
okay, that'd be great, Tom, because
Let's
I'm
pull
not
it up.
sure what was already there and what wasn't.
Let me find it. Where is it? So, how do I do this?
Go ahead, Tom, try it now. It was locked out.
Okay, I mean, let's try now. It's not my desktop. Let's see. So,
Or Brian, do you have it? Can you pop it up easy?
well,
I don't know how to do that, and I'm on my iPhone for the meeting.
yeah. So, okay. So I got share screen, right? So when I open that up, maybe I do the files. That would do. It doesn't come. I've done this before, and something's come up. It's not coming
Yeah.
up now.
What you do is open the file first, then go to share screen.
Well, I did open the file. Let's see. Files open on my computer. That's not going to do it.
Now, if you go to share screen, it should be one of the things that pops up when you hit share screen.
Let's try this.
Thanks for doing this, Tom.
Well, don't thank me yet. No, it's not coming up.
Tom, if you want to email it to me, I can send everyone a copy so that everyone could look at it while you're talking about it.
Yeah, I could. Yeah, just one sec. I don't think I have two computer screens going here, but let's see if that helps. Makes a difference. Well, maybe you can. Definitely not coming up.
Brian, the second part of the packet is the original ordinance, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So the first on page 19, this is as proposed to be amended. So this is the language changes. And if you go to page 21, starting on page 21, and then it runs through page 22. So it's not very long. Though the 21 and 22 is the original ordinance that you can currently find on the website. And on 19 and 20 are the proposed changes that was sent out. The only difference here is that I didn't have the red line changes. So you can't actually see them in the things that I posted. But they show the original and the changes, the proposed changes. They just don't show the red line version.
Do I have to open? It's just not working.
Well, just to kind of go through it, Tom Keegan, if you look at 38.4, rules for carrying firearms or hunting in or on city-owned or leased properties and facilities.
Right.
That we wrote. So that's all brand new. And then I don't think we really made much other changes. That's the major changes, which we were basically having.
Yeah, we took out a couple of you took out in 38.2 the E and the F.
Yeah, I can go through that. C is removed. B is changed to C.
Let's see it.
B
Yeah.
is changed to F is changed to E. It's frustrating. Let me search. I'll send this to Brian.
And then I'll forward it on to everyone so everyone can look at it, what Tom's describing.
Basically, one of the things we thought shouldn't happen anymore is that somebody should be able to discharge a firearm in their backyard to kill vermin. We thought that wasn't a good idea. And then primarily, we basically wanted to also make rules for carrying firearms or hunting in or on city-owned or leased properties and facilities. And with the idea to keep employees safe, our citizens safe.
I have some ideas.
I'm sorry?
Do you want to go through this point by point, or do we want to just jump around to questions?
I think we could go right to questions because,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have one question to Chief Kaholic. Chief, regarding hunting at calf pasture, I did ask this question once before and I got somewhat of an answer, but do we have a lot of complaints regarding hunting that would necessitate us passing an ordinance or a law to regulate or prohibit hunting at the beach?
I wouldn't say we get a lot of complaints, but we do get complaints each season generally. And the concern is always the proximity of the hunters to others because it's a highly used area.
Sure.
So it's not a tremendous amount of complaints, but the complaints we do get are of a concern because of the distance from people and what's going on at the park.
Right. And in the resolution, the officers, either be they Marine officers or you guys on land, go down there, they usually find the hunters in compliance or in non-compliance.
Usually in compliance.
Okay. That's
Below the high water mark and within the guidelines that are established, but.
so basically that it's historically, when you do get a call from a citizen who's concerned from whatever, be they walking at the beach or whatever, that when you do investigate the complaint, in most cases, the majority of the cases, the hunters are in compliance. Is that correct?
Correct. There have been a couple other complaints with people seeing them taking their weapons to go into the area. So that's another area, but that's right now would be permitted.
Yeah. So the actual hunting being off 250 or whatever it is from the high water mark. I'm not a hunter personally. Okay. Shooting away from land, et cetera, et cetera. That's usually they're always following the rules.
Yes.
Okay.
yeah. And I think one of the things that we did in the statute was, of course, we followed these, the statutes for Connecticut so that there's no prohibition whatsoever on hunting the way that it's established right now. What's allowed by Connecticut state law is obviously still permitted by Norwalk, by this new ordinance. It's really a matter of making sure that if people are carrying guns across city property, that they are duly licensed hunters, that their guns are unloaded, and that they're going to the marina.
I'm fine with that too. The only one that's kind of interesting, and Lisa and I did speak about it a little bit. Should we change the language in 38.3 regarding the office holders of skeet ranges? 1948, 1947, 19.
Tom, we talked about that. It covers rifle and skeet ranges. There is that range off, was it off 123? And then we figured you just leave well enough alone. There's no trap ranges that I know of, but there is.
Yeah, I'm just through the chair, Madam Chair, to Tom Livingston. Just the dates that they refer to. It says shall consist of 3 members, one to hold office until the second Tuesday in November 1948.
That's already happened, right?
Yeah, I think that guy served his term. And then the next one says second Tuesday in 49 and then 1950. We're getting closer.
I'm not sure. Does anybody know if there is a commission? We didn't play with this language because, leaving it well enough to do, but Brian, any idea whether or not we have a skeet commission and are people sitting?
I am not aware of whether there's a ski commission. I could try to see if there is one. Just as an aside, I did send you all the red line version that Tom forwarded to me, so this way you all have it, and it shows all the changes.
So Tom Keegan, are you suggesting that we make amendments of 38.3 to strike all of the old dated language?
Yeah, just to make it current. That's the only suggestion I would make. If we have such a commission and it is still in operation, We do, I know there's one range here in the city. I've never been in it, but it used to be Scott Moss.
You know how many fucking times you said that shit? Like you say it in your little Jamaican accent and you think that is funny or whatever. I said it to be funny.
I think
Like,
somebody
you better
needs to mute themselves, perhaps.
But, anyway, that's all I have as far as questions up to when we get to 38.4, then I have a couple of questions.
Well, why don't you finish that through and then we can go to, we'll finish through your questions and we'll go to Manny and then David.
Okay. This is a question I guess for Brian, and maybe Chief Kahawik can chime in. In Greenwich, I am not, as a sworn police officer, I am not required by UPM, which is Uniform Policy Manual, to carry a firearm. That is my choice, but that's in Greenwich. And I think each community can make its own rules about that. I understand that Norwalk is basically the same way. My concern is for the language in this would say, no person other than peace or police officers or properly authorized security personnel, each acting in, and this is the key, discharge of their duties. If I am an off-duty state police officer, I don't even know if they are required to carry firearms when they are off duty, but if they are, if I am going into Norwalk City Hall to pay my taxes or sign my kid up for swimming class, am I in this discharge of my duties? And is there any case law on this, Brian? Do you know?
I don't know, Tom. I'd have to do research on that.
Tom,
we-
Livingston, do you have?
There's an easy fix for that if we wanted to go that way. I mean, and I don't have a problem with letting peace or police officers carry a gun anytime. If you said no person other than peace or police officers or properly authorized security personnel acting in the discharge of their duties, I mean, just making that section apply just to the authorized security personnel.
Right.
And Chief, the question I have about that is, if you were to have a police officer in the building and something, a non-off-duty police officer in the building and something were to happen, but he were to have his gun, do we put him at risk at all for acting or not acting? Does he have like a duty
Yeah.
a duty to intervene? I mean, then we're putting the police officer in a place of having to make that decision. Right? How do we protect the police officers in those situations?
I don't think the ordinance would really come to bear at all with that. I mean, it was still, if they felt they could take action, they would. It would depend on the situation, whether they took action at that moment or not.
But they don't
Generally
have.
speaking, they would try to take some, if it was an active shooter, I would expect them to take action.
Mhm.
If it's something that they can wait for an on-duty officer, then they should do that. But it would really depend on the situation.
But they don't have a duty to act just because they happen to be there and they happen to be armed.
That's a good question. I'd have to really look at that. I think we would expect that they would. If they didn't, would they be derelicting their duty? That's a good question. I'd have to look at that.
Because I don't think we want to put officers in the position of having to do it. If we told them that they couldn't have their weapons in the building unless they were on duty, essentially, if they were acting in the discharge of their duties, then it wouldn't seem that there would be a burden for them we wouldn't be putting a burden on them to act.
Well, I don't think allowing them to have the gun would make the difference there.
Okay.
So I wouldn't want to put a prohibition on them if they were off duty. Many officers carry their weapon off duty, especially if they're going to, city business, maybe not on duty city business, but I know most state police carry their weapon, and FBI agents generally always carry their weapon, and they would be expected to act too. So I agree with Mr. Livingston's wording. I think if you just leave it that police, are not prohibited from doing it, doesn't mean that they have to carry it, but they're not prohibited. And security guards only if they're on duty, so to speak.
Okay, we can make that change. I think maybe that's a good change to make so that we don't put them at risk. So I think Tom and I know how to change the language from that. So Tom, you said basically no person other than peace or police officers, comma, or properly authorized security personnel, and then take the word each.
Delete the comma and each, so it should be or properly authorized security personnel acting in the discharge of their duties as such, comma.
Right.
Making a separate phrase.
Gotcha. Okay, and then we would do it probably in the next section as well. And there we would want to have the animal control officers and the security personnel being subject to the acting the discharge of their duties.
Well, you know, Lisa, that's a good question. That's a different context. I mean, and I throw this out for discussion, that section deals with hunting, trapping, pursuing on city-owned property. I don't think an off-duty policeman's going to go there and do this, but I'll throw that out to the chief and to Tom.
Yeah, that's the way I read it as well, that this was separate. This is if a, the dog warden, the animal control, has the authority to, to do some, if there's an animal that's dangerous, they may take action, but if they're not acting in their capacity, they'd have no reason to be going to the city-owned parks and, hunting or. So reading that, I think it makes sense as it is.
Okay, so let's leave that the way it is. Good. Does that satisfy everybody's thoughts for this section? Nick, you seem to have a question.
Yeah, Ms. Shanahan, may I address the committee? Thank you for letting me join. So I read the agenda, which is why I hopped on this one. And excuse me if there has been background that I may have missed. I'm not on the committee. Is this specifically to address the hunting at the beach?
Actually, when we were asked to address the hunting on the beach, at that point, we looked at the statute and we thought, one of the things that's a concern for us has been that Connecticut's an open carry state and one can carry guns into any building that there's not a posting for guns not to be able to be carried in. And so once that became across our threshold, we were like, well, if we're going to address the hunting part, we ought to also consider whether or not we really think that we ought to be allowing people to bring guns on our city properties, leased premises or parks. And so we thought this would be the right time to address those concerns too.
So I guess my thought on the matter is the broadness of the language, because there are people that are legally carrying, they're permitted, they've gone through the process, they've gone through due diligence, et cetera. This just says city owned or leased property. So if somebody who is legally licensed is on a municipal parking lot, are they under this ordinance a criminal?
They're not a criminal, but they're not to be bringing guns. I think that whether or not our employees and our citizens feel safe on city property with people carrying guns in places where people don't expect people to have guns.
So I think my topic is like, how, Chief, is this enforceable?
Yeah, basically though, we would probably not know unless there was a complaint made, generally speaking. It's more of right now, certain city buildings, this was done several years ago with Attorney Spar, have posted no firearms, but not all. And state law prohibits it in schools anyway. So this would just expand it to other properties, but generally it's only when we get a complaint, somebody sees it, and it's just to alert people kind of that it's not appropriate and it's prohibited. So I think it's trying to stop it before it starts, more or less. I think generally speaking, if somebody did have it, the first step would be to approach them and warn them and have them leave if they didn't want to, if they wanted to keep their firearm. It doesn't necessarily mean that we would make an arrest in each case.
Right.
But
there's
I think
not
it's just
sanction in the ordinance.
So there's a Connecticut General Statute 2928, which basically generally says that a person with a pistol permit is generally allowed to carry such weapon into a building, a premises, unless the owner prohibits such conduct. So the thing going back with Attorney Spar was that somebody had indicated that they owned a pistol and they were thinking about bringing it to some kind of proceeding at City Hall. I believe it was like a deposition or something. And so in response to that, a sign was put up in compliance with this state statute, which basically says you have the right to carry a pistol. You have the right to carry a pistol wherever you want, as long as the person who owns the property is allowing it. But in this situation, City Hall, for example, has a sign up that says that you're prohibited from bringing in a weapon into the building. Again, there are exceptions unless you're a police officer or something along that line. So that was the process, the logical extension of extending it just from City Hall to, I believe the library has also reached out about this, and then also extending it to other places adjacent to the discussion about the hunting at the beaches, which is city land.
So my concern, just kind of continue the discussion here. My concern is the broadness of the language. So, and I'll just give you an example of why I'm bringing this up. So I'm close to an elderly individual who manages a property in Bridgeport in a rougher area, and he witnessed a violent crime a few months back. So he legally carries a firearm for personal protection. Under this language, if he comes back to Norwalk and happens to be he bends over the wrong way and a concealed carry is shown and somebody files a complaint, and he doesn't even know that he's on city property, right? So not every resident knows that which parking lots are municipal lots, which are privately owned. Are we now making a legally armed resident a criminal with this language?
This isn't a criminal, there's not a criminal penalty to this. This just permits the police officer to say, you can't be here with that gun.
No, there would be a criminal penalty that we could make an arrest. It would violate the permit statute because the permit does not cover, as Brian mentioned. So the 20, I think it's E is what says, unless prohibited by the home or by the property owner. And speaking to the prosecutor, she said that 2935, carrying a pistol without a permit, would be the charge if somebody violated 2928E, because the permit is not valid if it's on property that's prohibited. So
right. So sorry, Chief. So so 2928E says the issuance of any permit to carry a pistol or revolver does not thereby authorize the possession or carrying of a pistol or revolver in any premises where the possession or carrying of a pistol or revolver is otherwise prohibited by law, like a school, or is prohibited by the person who owns or exercises control over such premises.
Okay.
So what would the penalty be? They would lose their permit?
Well, it's a criminal arrest, and they could lose their permit, but that would be up to the firearms board for the state if we reported that. But again, depending on the circumstances, our first step would not necessarily be to arrest the individual. If it was an error, I mean, there's a lot of discretion in our job all the time. So I wouldn't expect that someone, who simply made an error and was cooperative would be arrested for it. But technically speaking,
a comment. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please. Tom Keegan.
In follow-up to Mr. Sachinelli's question about 2938 carrying the pistol, does the building and or the property have to be posted? Does
Now,
it say that?
as I understand it, Brian, maybe Brian can correct me. I understand that if you don't want a gun in your premises, you have to have it posted.
That's my understanding, but I haven't looked at this in a while.
So in follow up to Nick's question again, what are we going to do in every municipal parking lot, every municipal property? Are we going to put up signs that say, you're in violation if you carry a
If we have this ordinance, we wouldn't have to post, right? Because it would then wouldn't that supersede the posting requirement, or would it?
I mean, we have a posting at City Hall that says, notice, no firearms or weapons of any sort are allowed on these premises. Violation of this order will result in prosecution and or other enforcement action. As it pertains to posting in the ordinance, I'd have to take a look at that issue, but if you're just asking me right now, I would say to you, we probably need some kind of sign up there indicating that you're entering onto a property where that's not going to be allowed. So, especially if it's city property.
And parking in parks. Manny, you've had your hand up forever.
Yeah, no, it's fine, totally. Yeah, so I guess that was my question too, because I understand that we've been discussing this for a long time. So I guess my question was really that too, the signage. what do we do? I mean, Connecticut's an open carry state too, and while the town law will not supersede the state, but we are able to enact our own. What do we do for somebody who maybe passes through or isn't aware, right? Who doesn't get, like it says, a town clerk shall give a copy of this article. But what do we do if somebody's passing through? And granted, Chief, you're absolutely right. Like, it's at the discretion, but this is a very contentious topic. So what if this interaction doesn't go? People are very opinionated with this topic, and right, yes, if someone's cooperating, they shouldn't get X and Y, but I could see this. I guess my concern was really that.
I mean, I would agree that I think it should be posted so people are alerted that that area is prohibited. Otherwise, they're going to claim that they had no knowledge of it. So,
right. And then it could quickly escalate, which we don't want.
Chief, sorry, Kadeem, just real quick. So, both Chief Kowalik and I both think that it should be posted. I found something from Attorney Jeff Spar, Deputy Corporation Counsel, who also recommended that if we were going to do this, that similar signs be posted at all city buildings where they want this restriction on guns to occur. So even Attorney Spar is also in agreement on this. Go ahead, Kadeem.
I understand what everybody's saying. My question is basically, so say just in general, Chief, the parking lot in the back of Sono, that's city owned, correct? Just say a random person from Norwalk.
I think
I'm saying to you, like,
I think part of that lot is city owned. Yeah.
Okay. So just hypothetically thinking, the back of the parking lot, I'm licensed to carry. There's no signs back there. So does this make it like enforceable?
Yeah, no, you got a good point. A situation like that. Yeah. I mean, if the ordinance was passed and it was posted, then it would be enforceable. But I understand your point. That, I don't know if that's the intent of I don't know what the intent is. I'm not going to speak for the council, but I don't know if that was really the intent. I think it was more of parks and, city buildings and things like that. But yeah, any city property this would fall under.
Nick, you've got your hand up, and then Tom Livingston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern is also, and maybe Brian, you want to speak to I'm fairly confident as written, this is a constitutional infringement, is it not? Does this open us up to lawsuits, civil suits, or?
So as
is written.
Yeah, well, litigation as it pertains to the Second Amendment is, there's a lot of it. So in terms of whether we'd be open to lawsuits, anybody has the right to file a lawsuit. Again, as this is currently written, I would have to go back and see whether, I know there are many other municipalities in the state of Connecticut that have similar type gun restrictions. And again, there is a state statute that allows you to say to somebody on your property or property that you control, you're not allowed to bring a gun here. So again, could somebody file a lawsuit? Yes. How's the potential success of something like that would be something that I'd have to look into to see if somebody's actually challenged one of these municipal ordinances in other jurisdictions. But it's my understanding that a lot of these other jurisdictions in Connecticut have had this type of restriction for quite some time. But if you want, Nick, I have about 76 pages on this. It has all different types of stuff on here. I'm more than happy to forward it to you.
So Nick, when we looked at this, we researched, I think how many, was it 76 different towns, Brian? There was a number of different.
It was a lot. It was a lot of different municipalities. I have them all on any members of the Common Council who want a copy of this. I'm more than happy to forward it. There's a whole slew of information on here that anybody's welcome to look at.
So we basically did look at a number of jurisdictions, and that this is a very common ordinance for many jurisdictions in Connecticut. So hasn't been challenged yet. Tom Livingston, I think I was waiting for you, and then Manny again.
Yeah, just a couple comments. One, to what Brian was saying, and Lisa was saying, I mean, this is done under the authority of the state statute. So if somebody wants to come in and challenge the state, I doubt they challenge us, they challenge the state statute and wipe out all the statutes in the state. But what I really want to talk about was posting. I mean, I think it's pretty clear, at least it's clear to me, that our buildings should be gun-free. I do believe our parks should be gun-free. I don't like the idea of somebody renting Gallagher Estate and having a big party with guns there. I don't think it's difficult to post a park because we have lots of rules in the park. It sounds to me like the only issue we're really talking about is whether parking lots should be covered. And maybe that's a separate issue. I have to imagine that the chief is sincere and believes that the police aren't going to, arrest somebody for just walking across a parking lot. But I understand that people may not want to rely on that. But I don't see this as, that difficult an issue. The parking lots, if people want to cut them out, I can live with that. But I don't think there's any reason to cut out parks or buildings. I couldn't support that.
David, you have your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of comments. One is that, I guess this is a question actually for the chief. Of the complaints, the discharge complaints or the gun complaints that have come across, have they been all primarily centered around the waterfowl issue, or have you had complaints in Cranberry or other parks where they've seen someone with a gun who may perhaps have been hunting?
No, the only complaints dealt with the waterfowls below the high water mark, but that's the only area that where hunting is permitted. So we have not experienced anything anywhere else or any complaints related anywhere else.
And then the other question would be, is there a way for us to write, what is it called? A peaceful transport, which I know a number of states allow you to transport. If you're coming from a state that allows gun ownership, if you're going to a state that allows gun ownership, you can actually transport the weapon across that state. There are a myriad of rules that govern that, but is there something that we can do that would cover a parking lot situation or a incidental municipal situation? I don't know. We'd probably be walking out on some sort of precedent there, but is there something we could do along those lines?
I don't know the answer to that, but the only suggestion I would have is if you wrote something in there and included city buildings or other properties that are properly posted. You don't necessarily have to post everything. Parking lots you could just leave as is, but certain areas that you decide you want to post would be prohibited, but it doesn't prohibit any municipal property per se.
Right. My understanding is the hunting question is that, without the 250-foot prohibition, a hunter could be below the high water mark in the water near the beach, but below the high water mark and hunt, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So by virtue of what we're doing here is we're trying to say, no, you've got to be outside the 250-foot mark of the high water mark. And then also we're saying that we have to go, that also then we're allowing someone to transport across, the marina to get to a boat to go out and hunt with an unloaded weapon. And that's kind of what we were attempting to do with this.
My understanding was that so that somebody wouldn't drive into Calf Pasture Beach, take out their shotgun and walk across, and then, go into the area that's permitted and then hunt legally. It would force them to enter that from the water side.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, yeah, I'm sort of, I think the placarding and the signage is something that we may have to look at as going down the path of putting that in here, because I hear the issues on both sides. I for one I don't want to see the guns in city parks. That's my issue, because I think that's a recipe for a larger problem. So that's just sort of my opinion. And I think city buildings the same, but if we have to placard it in order to make this work, then we have to think about that as well.
I saw Nick's hand up and then I saw Dominique's and then Manny. So Nick, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, thank you. So my thought, and I think this kind of goes back to what Manny brought up before. So I think the postage would be necessary for out of towners, or if even maybe naming in the document which city buildings or city properties qualify, because I'm on land use. We do have city properties change hand fairly often, and the fact that this says leased properties, is kind of creates some additional broadening of that dynamic. We could lease property at any given time, and that's this, as is written, sounds a little bit more of a gotcha to the legally armed resident, which is my primary concern. And I'll be transparent with the group. I have a pistol permit. I'm legally licensed. I'm not necessarily saying that I want to carry a firearm into City Hall, or nor would I. But there are times where I'm transporting. Maybe I've gone to, I do skeet shooting. I'll have some things with me, and I personally, as a legally armed citizen, the concern is if I'm going between these events and going back to my point of out of towners, I'd almost rather them have a firearm, have control of their firearm, as opposed to having it unsupervised in a vehicle because, you know, we made a parking lot inaccessible to them. And I mean, there's just a lot of dynamics that seem like kind of gotchas unintentionally, right? I see the intent of this, and I think we could get there, but I think if we defined it a little bit better, we won't unintentionally put, you know, legally armed residents in a bad situation.
So one thing, Nick, just to point out, is that one of the reasons why you want to be broader in an ordinance, I'm sure you know this, rather than tight, is like if we make a list of properties and our properties change, the ordinance becomes obsolete. So we have to be in some ways a little bit broader than specific, you know, specifying properties. But the parking lot issue might well be something we should consider, you know.
So I was just scrolling through as you guys were all talking, some of the ordinances from other jurisdictions. These have all been sent to you, and I just forwarded it to Nick as well, so he could have a chance to take a look at it as well. These run the gamut. Some of them say you're not allowed to discharge firearms. Some of them, like North Stonington, for example, all parks, let's see, where does it say it? Firearms, it shall be unlawful for any person to bring into or have in his possession in any park or recreation area. So North Stonington specifically cites parks and recreation areas. There's other ones that indicate you can't discharge it, other ones that say you can't bring it. But there's quite a few. There's quite a few here. And again, General Statutes 2928 basically says that if you own or in control of the property, you can exercise control over the premises. You can prevent somebody from bringing it in. And again, if that's the position that everyone's going to take, I think it's everyone's recommendation that we put up a sign or some kind of notice so people realize that. Now, obviously, there is a concern, as Nick just pointed out, somebody is lawfully carrying their weapon and they go to walk into Cranberry Park, and now there's a notice up there saying you can't carry. So they leave it in their car. They don't drive it home. They leave it in their car. Is that something, you know, that's, it's not really, you know, it's the law says you can prevent people from doing it. It doesn't go the step further and says, well, what happens if someone brings it to the threshold of your premises? Then what do you do? Do you leave it in the car? Do you drive it back home? That's obviously a different issue, but I just wanted to let everyone know that the ordinances, I can forward it again to anyone who wants to look at it that can't find it, but there's a lot of municipalities that have some kind of restriction on this at a minimum.
So it sounds like less of a lawsuit. Dominique, you had your hand up, but we haven't gotten a chance to speak.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. My questions, I guess they really do dovetail off this, but coming from a specific vantage point of knowing more about this in schools, I know that we own the school buildings as a city. Is that correct to say, generally speaking? And I know that Connecticut has much more stringent gun-free school laws than even federal, but I know from those laws that there are some provisions that allow for folks to bring unloaded weapons that are in a locked container or a locked firearms rack on a motor vehicle. So is that something that perhaps is back to this parking lot issue that could shed some light on that? But my question is, it's good to hear that we don't have folks going through Cranberry Park hunting, because I know of its proximity to, say, the Cranberry School, but I'm just wondering to the chief, have we ever heard of any instances where people have asked to cross school property with an unloaded weapon as they are in the process of hunting? I don't think that happens here, but I know that has happened in other states, cities.
I'm not aware of having them cross property. I remember a situation a couple of years ago. There was somebody walking, either biking or walking down Calf Pasture Beach Road with their firearm.
Okay.
And we got a call from the school.
Yeah.
They were upset because somebody saw this person in the area, but it turned out to be a hunter going to the beach. That's the
Yeah.
only one I recall that's even similar to that.
Okay, thank you very much, because that's my concern. It's good to hear that only happened once, though that is a concern, and I think is a added benefit of trying to hash this out together, because anytime we're even in close proximity to a school with a weapon, even a somewhat concealed weapon, specifically in this day and age, that's something I think that we really have to keep in mind. And I assume, I know actually the Drug Free Schools Act requires signage and placards at all the schools, but I'm wondering what the state of them are. Because is that something we want to think about with this ordinance, is making sure it's very clear on all the schools. I assume we don't have to worry about that, but that could be like a standard to consider.
I think the statutes in Connecticut are pretty stringent about weapons at schools. I don't have it in front of me, but I remember reading that somewhere.
Yeah, from my recollection, they're very stringent to the point where even if you're licensed to carry, you may not be allowed to bring them in, but I'm not 100%. So that's something that, yeah. David, you say no?
So
Okay.
Brian, is that a state
You can't
preemption?
bring it into a school or anywhere
Yeah.
near a school.
Hey,
15
keep it
Yeah,
on.
the schools are prohibited even if you're licensed. You just
Yeah.
can't do it.
Right, right.
And I don't believe the schools are posted, but the state law is known, it's very clear.
It's
State
law.
law prohibits it. I don't recall any schools with signage that I recall.
I don't believe they have to be posted. I
Where the
believe
state
it's,
can-
Just going back to the point that Nick raised, about, the Second Amendment and, there's, I think at least maybe some language to start out with in the Weston ordinance about this. Portions are copied into the 76-page document, but the Weston Town Ordinance has some discussion about the legislative findings, purpose, and intent about promoting peace, safety, and good government and the welfare of the municipality and its inhabitants. But then it also talks about state and federal regulations in another one of them. Two of them are posted into the attachment. It's probably not all of them from Weston, but Weston might be an ordinance that everyone wants to take a look at before the next meeting, because it seems to have some generalized language that perhaps we want to incorporate in so that we're not, so people aren't misconstruing us infringing on their Second Amendment right. Specifically 79.1 and 79.4, and I'm assuming Chapter 79 of Weston's municipal code talks more about this, but those are two sections that is in the 76-page document. It's on page 19. That might be something everyone might want to take a look at. Maybe it'll trigger something new in some people's minds before the next meeting.
Okay, Manny, it seems that you had your hand up. Did I miss you?
Yeah, just a quick question here too. I don't know, perhaps I maybe am reaching for this one, I'm not sure, but I guess my question's around just wildlife management. So I guess let's just say this ordinance is passed, and I mean, again, I don't know how many people hunt down here, how many do for sport. I'm not an avid hunter as well, but I did grow up in an area where people do hunt for food and et cetera. But if people decrease hunting and waterfowl is not deer, right? Do we foresee an unforeseen cost in, if they're now city employees or we have to hire people to do this? Again, I mean, I don't know if we looked into that part. I guess that was my only question. I guess, do we do a lot of that now anyways? And do we foresee that possibly causing an issue? Because that's
Yeah, I get your question. I think perhaps the chief can talk about this, but I think the only place where hunting is allowed is at Calf Pasture Beach in the
Right.
entire city. Is that right?
And Vets Park,
yeah.
below the watermark.
Yeah. So it's
Certain areas of Vets, but it's all related to below the high water mark, because that's allowed by state law.
Okay.
But the city does not permit it anywhere in the city.
Oh, right. I guess my concern was, is there, because it's expensive to either contract out, or do we foresee us having to do? I didn't know if there was any type of wildlife management that we currently have to do or get called to do, or is that potentially something that we receive an undue burden for and an increased cost, because that can quickly add up. And again, I know waterfowl are not deer and ducks are not deer. I just didn't know if we were currently doing it and if you foresee a potential impact for that. And that was really it for me.
okay. Well, we did permit if there has to be wildlife culling for any reason, we do permit that under 38.4B. But I don't know that this would impact that. We either do it or we don't, and I don't think the statute, the ordinance would impact that.
And I think to Manny's question, the city doesn't currently do that, to my knowledge.
Right. The city doesn't currently do that, and under 38-4B, we would now be required to do it. So I guess that's my.
No, you're not required. No, you could, the city could do it. They're not required to do it.
I'm sorry, could do it, but again, if that was my only question.
We didn't want to prohibit the city from doing that if it had to be done, but, and we wanted to make sure that people who are properly authorized to do it could. So that we made the exception to make sure it could happen if needed.
No, that's fine. I mean, I guess right now, if the conversation's not coming up like, hey, we've had to do it, then it probably likely isn't happening much. So I think I'm okay there. So I'm okay with how it reads. I just didn't know if now with that, I don't want to say it was a transfer of ownership, but now we're still permitting the city to do it. The obligation now falls on the city to do it if needed. But if chief is saying, hey, we have an idea, then it's probably not something of great concern. That was just my other question.
Okay, so I think I have one other idea, and then if there's other questions, David was going to talk about the size of the shot, and then perhaps we should table this to turn it one more time with the comments that we've gotten to this evening and bring it to our next meeting. David, do you want to bring us up to date on?
Just really quickly, in the research I found, I think we probably want to change that to shot number 1, because the waterfowl hunting, the size of the shot, it refers to the BB size, the pellet size, and the shot gets smaller as the number increases. As it gets smaller, increasing, you run the potential of wounding the animal and not actually killing it, dependent upon. There's a lot of factors. It depends upon the choke size of the weapon, how much the pattern is choked, and that. So the recommendation is that now a lot of waterfowl hunters hunt with 1 and 2, especially for geese. So I think we probably want to change it. That probably was there from back in as Mr. Keegan brought up before, probably back to the 1948 day when this was originally written. So I would recommend we change it to number 1 or number 2. Number 1 is fine.
Okay, great. Any other comments that we should take into consideration as we turn this potential ordinance one more time? Anybody I missed feedback? Okay, so I would definitely entertain a motion to table.
Actually, Lisa, just real quick. I mean, I hear a lot of the sentiments that were said tonight. I too am a permitted gun owner and sadly not these days as avid, but a hunter. And I want to make sure that we are, people who are duly licensed are not being an undue burden. But I also am concerned about, weapons usage and carrying within our city and within the city parks. And, I think that we've got to go back and look at this, but I think we've got to come up with a solution, because I think it needs to be clear, and it's not clear now.
Yeah, without,
I'm just gonna say, to piggyback off that, there's a lot that people already have to do with their concealed carry. So, I mean, I think if we can get the signage piece in check, I think good for my side. So.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for this really wonderful discussion. Very, very interesting and informative. So we learned a lot. And would somebody like to make a motion to table this to our next meeting? Dominique. So all in favor? That's a unanimous vote. So great. Thank you, Chief. We
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Chief, so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
I really appreciate it. So our last agenda item, poor Sabrina has listened through this whole evening. One of the things that we would really like to consider also at our next meeting is some changes to the outdoor dining ordinance so that we can help some of our local business people. So Sabrina, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks for having me, everybody. Always exciting conversation on these calls. So as you guys are well aware and have seen, due to our new COVID world, we've expanded outdoor dining at direction of the state to be in the public right of way and not to be adjacent solely next to someone's storefront or front of their restaurant. Executive Order 7MM from Governor Lamont actually allowed us to do that. Our ordinance currently does not allow any outdoor dining that's not directly adjacent to the storefront, and it normally doesn't allow it in the right of way that we own either. The executive order also included other things like a expedited process for approval on our end where we had a 10-day turnaround. It changed the ADA requirements so that it was the 6 foot instead of the 7, I believe. And because of that, it gave restaurateurs more options of where to place outdoor dining. And also you could drive by like Cafe Dolce, for example. They use some of their parking spaces, et cetera, et cetera. And there was no additional parking requirements that were guaranteed because of that either. And that was all due to the executive order that relaxed the legislation on our end to allow restaurateurs to do that sort of thing. Normally our ordinance, like I said before, does not allow that. So we took it as, you know, a successful story for Norwalk out of COVID. All of our city departments, whether it be police, fire, DPW, health and planning and zoning, we all had an expedited 24-hour turnaround process with help from the legal department on the insurance side of the house. And from all of this, we've got positive responses from the restaurants and positive responses from the public. So now we're looking to expand the ordinance that we currently have to be more similar to what the executive order allows, because once the executive order expires, those will no longer be allowed unless we were to change the ordinance ahead of time. So we're looking at it now. It's going to have some input from all of the departments I listed before, a real group effort to make sure that the process is what it should be and that we like kind of the process that we would have moving forward and what we need to change from that in order to make it a more permanent fixture in our ordinance and in our legislation. So we're hoping to make the changes and talk to all the departments before your next meeting, but also to get everything approved and approved by council as well before next spring. So the executive order that exists will last for the rest of this year, but once it expires, we're gonna need something else in place so that we continue to do this when the weather becomes nice again. So that's kind of where all of this has stemmed from, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys may have on that front.
Does anybody have any questions of Sabrina? Looks like Tom Livingston.
Yeah, just to be clear. So you're not looking, let me rephrase that. So you're basically want to revise this existing ordinance to conform with the way things are now. Is that basically it?
Correct. And a lot of it's really just changing the location aspect. That was the major change that you would see in the ordinance. It just says that you can only be adjacent to your specific storefront. That would be the major change that I've seen so far in the ordinance. And we might want to include some language on an approval process basis. I believe in the ordinance now, it doesn't have any timeframes for our end, and it doesn't have any timeframes of when a permit expires or doesn't expire. So those are things we're all going to have to consider from a departmental standpoint and staff standpoint before we approve the full ordinance in its new language. But like I said, yes, we're trying to make it similar to what the executive order says, but also coming back to a more really realistic standpoint that, you know, we won't have COVID forever. And we want to make sure we have the process that's easy for the business owner, but also that makes sense on our end as staff as well.
Right. And I assume you'll involve the local restaurants in the process too, right?
Yep.
All right, thanks.
Dominica, look as though you had a question.
I did. Thank you very much. My question was just related to making sure. So what's going on now, Sabrina, is ADA compliant, I'm assuming. I've heard that it has raised some concerns about ADA accessibility issues, particularly down on Washington Street. What are your thoughts?
So that was actually something that we've had to deal with specific restaurateurs with the barriers and DPW having to make ADA accessible ramps. Because we put the barriers where they are and people have had tables in the way, the sidewalk ramps aren't as accessible as they normally would have to be ADA compliant. So we've had to make temporary ramps on the sidewalks so that people it's ADA compliant to go in and out of the barriers as well. And that would be something we would have to do going forward to continue to be compliant.
So do you believe there's a real thrust for the ordinance to make sure that that is something that is considered? Like, do you recommend we put that into this ordinance?
I don't think it's necessary just because that's something that we have to follow regardless from a planning and zoning standpoint and from a federal standpoint. So I don't think we really need to hammer it home in the ordinance. I mean, it wouldn't matter either way because we just have to make sure that we're doing that regardless, since we're federally tied to that standard.
And then is it yourself or planning and zoning that makes sure there's compliance with that?
It's really, so right now it's been a kind of a mix between planning and zoning, building and code, and health and police on the enforcement side because of the social distancing requirements that we have in place right now. But yes, the main check in the box where a restaurateur would submit a plan for outdoor dining would mainly go to planning and zoning first to say your space requirements are what they're supposed to be, your tables are where they're supposed to be, that kind of thing. But from the enforcement standpoint, it kind of depends what the complaint is about. If it's about, distancing and things like that, if we're in COVID times, then it would go through health. But if it's, on a building and code safety kind of standpoint, it would be kind of something else. So it depends.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out in my own mind when I'm approaching this, how do we make sure that we have accessibility and there doesn't have to be a complaint, just coming from that as a starting point. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's through planning and zoning and DPW. So they both see the plan submitted by the restaurateur and they would flag the ADA from either the DPW standpoint or the planning and zoning standpoint. A lot of times it's DPW because there's also space requirements from how far a table and a person can be from a fire hydrant, a light post, things like that. So.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Sabrina, I have a question just to understand it. So as far as outdoor dining during the shoulder seasons being, later fall and early spring, are there things that we need to consider in the short term, or is this all really pretty much for what you imagine would be warm weather outdoor dining changes?
These changes would mainly be for the warmer weather. We are actually releasing, hopefully by next week, some guidance in partnership with the state and the police department and fire, especially code, in regards to tents and heaters and those types of things that become of concern when the colder weather and of course snow starts to fall. We're trying to, be as responsive as we can at this point. I know you've probably seen, Washington Prime has submitted, a more permanent outdoor structure, but we're also kind of leaning towards what the state's saying where, if you have two sides or more down, you have to be indoor dining compliant with the regulations and all those types of things. But some of these structures, will be there for the foreseeable future, not just in COVID times. So they have a lengthier process that has to go through planning and zoning and building and code for safety reasons. So we're looking to compile, an FAQ as well as a shorter process during those times. But this ordinance, technically, if it's outdoor dining at any point in time of the year, it would be the same rules and regulations.
Great. So COVID would be an outside concern. In other words.
Yeah, so the changes that we would suggest to make, we're making because we were forced to kind of follow the rules when the regulations came out due to COVID, but it's actually been, a silver lining in all of this that we realize that we like it and that we want to continue this. So that's how and why we need to take the steps to make sure from an ordinance standpoint and from a staff standpoint that this is kind of what we want to do going forward and that we're not going to box ourselves in and not be able to do what we've done this year in future years, hopefully in a post-COVID world.
Great, thank you, David.
Lisa, I forwarded everyone on the committee and Nick as well, a publication that I found from Shipman and Goodwin, which discusses Executive Order 7MM about local approvals for outdoor dining and sale of goods. It's a primer. It will, get everyone going in case they haven't had a chance to look at this issue. So I forwarded it on to you all. And if anyone else wants it from the Common Council, let me know. I'm more than happy to send it out.
Great. Thank you. David.
Thanks. Just real quick. Thanks, Lisa. Sabrina, are you looking for permanent, an ordinance that allows for continued use of right-of-way? Is that also part of this? Because I know that, Washington Street, you're using the right of way now. but that we would allow for that. And how are we looking to make this site specific to Sono, or are you looking, something broader that other parts of the city could, people could apply for and try to get a permit to use the right of way to do outdoor dining in the summer?
So we would want to include that allowance of using the right of way, but it would have to be on a case by case approval basis by DPW, by police, by fire, but they all see the outdoor dining permits regardless. So that would have to be an additional check in the box. So if there's somewhere, for example, we were looking at some spaces along Wall Street, but because of the transit district buses that go on that route, we weren't able to taper the barriers in a correct way that would be efficient for anybody and safe. So there's always that caveat of us being able to say no to using the right of way, but we also want to give restaurateurs the ability to ask to use it and then us have the discretion to say no.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
No problem.
Great. Any other questions for Sabrina? Hearing none, is there any other discussion items that people want to bring up or new business? And if not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Manny, motion to adjourn. Thanks, everybody. Really lively discussion tonight. Really appreciate it. Nick, thanks for joining us and bringing your point of view. We really appreciate it. Great. Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
good night, everybody.
Everyone have a good one.